Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep the Mining podcast. And today's guest is Marc Bishop Lafleche, who's the CEO of Anglo Pacific Group, who are a global natural resources royalty and streaming company listed on both the London and Toronto Stock Exchange. They're giving investors exposure to commodities like cobalt, copper, nickel, vanadium, and uranium. Marc has a banking and international finance background and has been with Anglo Pacific for the past 8 years, and he's here today to talk about the company, about his new role as the CEO, and about the strong ESG principles that underline their investment strategy. So that's welcome Marc to the podcast. How you doing, Marc?
Morning, Rob. Thanks for hosting me. Great to be here with you today.
Yeah, appreciate your time as well. So congratulations on obviously being appointed the CEO. I wanted to give the audience a little bit of background about yourself. As I mentioned, you're from the banking investment background, or you have a banking investment background. So I just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your career, so from, I suppose, from when you graduated to sort of present day.
I'd be delighted to, Rob. I've followed a path which I think is quite typical for folks who are keen on the natural resources sector and who have an interest in generally commodities. I started my career at Citigroup, and in that team I worked across the M&A transactions, across equity capital markets transactions. But one of the best experiences I had being at Citi was the opportunity to work laterally in other teams. And I also worked in the leveraged finance team. And today, when I look back at that background and platform, it's remarkably perfect for someone who ends up working in royalties and stream, because the royalty and stream product is very much a mix of all of the above, in the sense that we're a mix of an equity product and a debt product. And that skill set and experience has positioned me to do really well in the royalty and streaming sector. I didn't think too much about it about the time, but I suppose that's life. It ends up just taking you places and that I'm down a path that that's not always expected, but can be quite rewarding.
Okay, yeah. I wonder if you, just moving on from there, I wonder if you can tell us, give us a snapshot overview of Anglo Pacific.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. I'm exceptionally excited about this business. And when you take a step back, every investment that we make going forward, fundamentally, our objective is to make the world a better place for our children and our grandchildren. We have an exceptional amount of momentum, and the business has been completely transformed. We're really looking to make investments in commodities that are going to help us achieve our net zero climate change objectives. And I think one thing that's unique about Anglo Pacific is, it's not just a matter of saying we're going to do it. It's we've done it. We've done it over the past 8 years as a company. So I'm just delighted to and absolutely honored to have been appointed as its new CEO. I'll be starting in that role on the 1st of April. And from here on out, I think it's, in many ways, a great way to keep a lot of the momentum that we've generated and to keep going on our journey.
Yeah, I want to talk about ESG principles, but I want to talk about that a bit later on. But obviously, as you just mentioned, you've been appointed the CEO of Anglo Pacific, and obviously you're going to be stepping into that role shortly. So can you tell us a little bit more about that transition period and what you're most looking forward to in that role?
Well, being an internal candidate, one of the benefits, as always, is that these transitions are very smooth. I've worked very closely with Julian over the last 8 years, and so that's certainly a benefit, we think, in terms of just maintaining continuity and ensuring that ultimately we're in a really good place to keep the team together. The team at Anglo Pacific has over 65 years, I think, in aggregate collectively of royalty and streaming experience. And not only that, experience looking at non-precious metals royalties and streams. And when you look in the world, there are just not that many people with that skill set. So for me, one of the things I'm really excited about the transition is, keeping this team together and making sure that we're all working hard collectively to keep on going.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned obviously Julian. We actually did a podcast with Julian back in April last year, which is 2021, which is episode 127. So any of our listeners want to revisit that episode, and obviously feel free to go and have a listen to that. And Julian, who's obviously the previous CEO, you can obviously have a look and see how the company's moved from there to obviously present day. So looking at the rest of 2022, what should we expect from Anglo Pacific, and how do you plan to drive the next phase of the company's growth?
I'm lucky in many ways to inherit the business in a position of such strength. We recorded record revenues for 2021, and the really strong commodity price environment, particularly in the second half of last year, has continued, if not strengthened, actually, into 2022. So from here, the platform is really firing on all cylinders. And I think that does two things. Number one, it creates a very strong cash flows that we can use to rapidly delever the balance sheet, and reduce much more rapidly the debt that we drew to finance our Voisey's Bay acquisition. That was a transformational cobalt stream that we acquired last year for $205 million. But number two, gives us a lot of organic cash flow to make more royalty acquisitions and keep growing the business to drive shareholder value. So for 2022, from an income statement perspective, we're expecting, based on where we are today, a really strong year.
Yeah. Also, obviously, the company has strong ESG principles that underlie your investment strategy. I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit more about that.
Anglo Pacific is, I think, quite unique amongst companies. And I mentioned this a bit earlier, but I don't think there are many companies actually who have really transformed themselves in the same way that Anglo Pacific has. 8 years ago, Anglo Pacific Group was almost 80 to 90% coal. And fast forward today, the business is 75% by asset value: cobalt, copper, nickel, vanadium, uranium. In other words, all the key commodities that are really required to drive a cleaner and more sustainable world. And as of today, we continue on that journey. We still have some coal in our portfolio, and that's expected to gradually fade out by 2026. We've exited thermal coal, and so the business is really positioned to be the vehicle, we think, for any investor who wants to have de-risked exposure to commodities that support a more sustainable world.
I wonder if you can just tell us about some of the deals that you've recently completed. Absolutely.
And your one key thread between all the transactions is really that sustainability point. The cobalt transaction that we did relates to cobalt produced at a mine in Canada that globally has one of the lowest carbon footprints per unit of nickel. In the past, we acquired exposure to iron ore, which on a scope 3 basis results in some of the lowest carbon units per unit of steel produced in the world. Our vanadium exposure is used to strengthen steel, but also effectively reduce the amount of steel required, thereby reducing carbon emissions in terms of relative steel units produced. And of course, and most exciting, well, maybe not most, but one that is exciting is our nickel transaction, which is a type of nickel that can flow straight into a battery supply chain. And not only that, but is produced at a very low carbon footprint relative to other nickel operations. So we're really excited about everything we've done. We're really excited about how the business has changed. And we're really looking forward to do more along that thematic.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. Anglo Pacific's vision is to build a diversified royalty and streaming portfolio focused on obviously commodities that support a more sustainable world. Can you talk us through how you differentiate from your peers in the sector, and how you will continue to work towards that vision?
Absolutely. I think when most people think about the royalty and streaming space, because the sector is generally so focused on precious metals, the names that come to mind are, the larger precious metal royalty and streaming companies. And for us, we think that's really an opportunity, because today there just are not that many people out there looking to create the portfolio exposure that we are. There are just not that many people, for example, looking to acquire vanadium royalties or rare earths royalties, because ultimately rare earths are used to create the magnets that we need to power renewable energy or electric vehicles. And so the opportunity for us is quite large. And secondly, if investors are looking to get exposure to these commodities, how do they do it? It's very difficult to do it in a de-risked way. It means either looking at, lithium company A to Z and taking risk on individual, companies and projects and development. And that's really the platform that Anglo Pacific can be. If someone wants to get exposure to these commodities in a diversified way, we have the track record, we think, which is very strong, and we're very transparent about that track record. In fact, we publish, we're figures that show what the returns are on the deals we've done, such that investors can decide for themselves if they want to support us. And if they do decide that, we're prudent stewards of their capital, then we can be a partner to both our operators and all our stakeholders to be a permanent source of exposure to a really exciting set of commodities.
How do you feel the company has changed and developed in the past year? And I suppose we can look at when we last recorded a podcast with Anglo Pacific, which was in April 2021.
It's hard to believe it's even the same company, actually, if I'm honest. And if one were to go back and look at the company in 2014, it's a completely different set of assets and different commodity exposure. And we're really excited about that, because 8 years ago we said we were going to do it, and today we have done it. I mentioned it earlier. The goal was always to pivot from our heritage of coal to be investing in commodities and mining projects that are supporting a sustainable future. And we've really transformed the company. We would really encourage anyone who has looked at Anglo Pacific in the past but thought, oh, that's a coal play, to take another look, because it's a completely different business.
And lastly, what's the company looking to achieve during the course of this year and going into 2023?
Over the course of this year, I mentioned it a bit earlier, but one of our key objectives is, given the really strong commodity price environment we're facing, and we're keen to use those excess cash flows to pay down the debt we've taken to finance our last acquisition much more quickly. That'll put us in a position where we can use our balance sheet to do more and conclude more acquisitions. That's really the key goal. I think one of my focuses as the incoming CEO is to make sure that we keep doing the things that we've done in the past well. And part of that is our commodity selection, but also our acquisition philosophy. We're looking for good projects with strong counterparties that are low cost, that have really robust ESG credentials. And so by no means should folks expect any radical departures from all the things that they liked about Anglo Pacific in the past. And furthermore, where we sit today, the business is really exceptionally well positioned to do a whole lot more of all the things that people have liked.
As a closing note, is there anything else that you would like to add?
I would say that I would say simply, well, thank you first of all for hosting me, and I would just reemphasize that message that this business is completely different from where it was, last year or even the year before or the year before. When we make investments, the bottom line really is that we're really driving towards being part of the solution to achieving global climate change objectives. And we really think that our business should really appeal generationally to a group of ethically and responsibly minded investor groups. And so hopefully, as we do more of what we've done in the past, that message and that appeal will be even stronger.
Yeah, Marc, really appreciate your time, and obviously wish you well for 2022, and especially in your new role as the CEO. So wish you all the success. Those that are listening, appreciate your continued support, and appreciate if you can share this episode. Obviously, Anglo Pacific have gone through some sort of transition over the last 12 to 18 months and completely changed the business. And if you're interested in cobalt, copper, nickel, vanadium, or uranium, then maybe it's a company that you should keep a close eye on. So appreciate if you can share this episode amongst obviously friends, family, other investors, so they can obviously follow the company more closely. So no worries, Marc. Until next time, happy mining.